We're back live. We are continuing our discussion with Vermont Sustainable Jobs Fund, and on we go.
Great, thank you. All right, so we're going to take a look here now at markets and local food sales. So where are producers selling their food into, and where are some of the opportunities? So when we look at where do Vermonters spend their food dollars, so about almost $4.8 billion are being spent on food in the state, and the majority of that is happening at grocery stores and restaurants. So those two make up almost 70% of the total. This is kind of broken down in more granularity, but if you kind of generalize the sales outlets, that's what it comes out to. So grocery and restaurants are the majority of where dollars are spent, and then you've got other places like schools and colleges, direct sales. Another thing too that has really jumped out as we've looked at this over time and clearly through COVID is that mail order and home delivery is now 4% of the total spending. So a lot more people doing mail order, home delivery types of food purchasing.
Yes. So thank you, Chair. Can you just quickly, what's the difference between a full service and a limited service restaurant, and where are the farmers markets on this chart?
Yeah. So on the first question, so full service, limited service is a distinction of is it a sit down with you have a server? That would be full service. Okay. Limited service would be like fast food kind of convenience, where there might not be a service component.
So we actually have fast food places that are selling Vermont food?
Well, now this is just the total. So
where they spend. Okay.
Yeah. So this is not the local food component.
And what about the farmers market?
Yeah. So it's small, and I can't label. I couldn't actually get the label to show. I forget which one, but it's about 3% are happening in the direct sales.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
And I'll show some more because actually too the direct sales is changing with how farms are doing that. So there's different ways that we can think about too direct sales that aren't kind of covered in that 3% number. So in terms of of that total, how much of that money is going towards local purchasing? So we have been tracking local food sales since 2010, and our most recent estimate is that 10.1% of the total food being purchased is being spent on local food. So that's one in every $10 or 10 of every 100. Not too bad. And that has continued to grow over time. So we're seeing improvements in terms of the total number of dollars being spent on local food since we started tracking in 2010. And then where are those dollars being spent in terms of local food? It is still the majority is happening in the retail grocery environment. Direct sales though is about 20% of that. Restaurants is about 8%. So those top so stores, direct to consumer sales, and restaurants, that's about like 80% of local food purchasing. Yeah. We've also we've seen increases in K through 12. And that, I think is a direct result of the efforts to get more local food into schools. And then the higher ed drop off for 2020 was more to do with COVID, with universities closing, less kids on campus, that kind of thing. So we're expecting that number to jump back up. And then hospitals has been relatively flat over time.
And these are quite accurate numbers.
Yeah, so our methodology has been published. Other states are now adapting it. We were the first to kind of develop this way of tracking local food sales, and we can't reveal kind of all of the sources, so everything's kind of aggregated. But we are getting specific data from distributors, retailers, farms, value-added producers. Yeah. And so I think too, just, because more Vermonters are spending lots of money in grocery because it represents the majority too of actually where kind of local purchases are going towards. That's why we've focused attention in the retail grocery environment. That's why we've worked with independent grocers to increase their purchasing of local food. That's why we're working with farms and food producers to help them get into more stores because there's obviously a lot of dollars being spent in those stores. So a lot of opportunities still to grow that number even more. And then so looking at direct sales and how this has changed over time. So we have seen increases from 2007 to 2022, from 22 million to 42 million, almost 43 million. Part of this change, though, is also how USDA has tracked this number. So it used to only include raw products directly sold to consumers. Now they're also tracking any value-added product that the farm is selling direct to consumer as a part of that estimate. So that changed, and so that's part of why the number jumped from 2012 to 2017. But another thing that this is, I think, is a real trend that's really important is that the way that farms are selling direct has also changed in time. So it's not just farmers markets and farm stands and CSAs. USDA now also tracks the value of foods sold directly to retail markets, institutions, and food hubs. So that number has increased 86% from 2017 to 2022. And there's over $100 million of direct sales now that farms are involved with that go direct to a retailer, direct to an institution, or direct to a food hub, which we've talked a little bit about. And that's the food hubs are providing a lot of service and opportunity. And so we have seen producers take advantage of that, and it's become a significant part of how they sell into the marketplace. So that continues to grow. It is at $100 million now. And I think too, this is a reflection of the evolution of direct markets, as farms have sort of understood the limitations or the opportunities of their farmers market. They've looked to kind of create different opportunities to do that direct sales. And so now they're finding opportunities with a retailer, with an institution, or with a food hub. And so if you look at those two things combined, so direct to consumer, but also this like direct to retail, institution, food hub, it's the value of sales direct has increased from 2017 to 2022 and is over $143 million now moving through these direct channels. And shifting gears here. So just covered a lot kind of on the market and economic side, just a little more here now on farmland and the environment. So we're going to look at, so total acres of farmland. So this has decreased. So this is kind of one of the, trends, I think, where there's concern. So not only there's loss of number of farms, but farmland has decreased by almost 11% since 1997. And farmland is, there's been analysis too of projecting where there's going to be loss in the future. So kind of business as usual, there's an expectation that we're going to lose potentially another 41,200 acres by 2040. And that's would mainly in this analysis be in Addison, Franklin, and Rutland.
And what merits the loss?
What's in terms of causing that?
Just gets the field doesn't get, because some might be development, but not that much. So what?
So it's so this is based around would be some of it is development, so like permanent loss. Mm-hmm. Some of it could be land going out of production. So maybe it's still open land, but it's not in productive use. But I think this analysis is more around development pressure specifically.
You really believe that there's going to be 41,000 acres developed over the next how many years you're,
15.
yeah,
I mean, it's
Yeah, by
basically,
2020.
it's basically the existing trend line, just projected out. If nothing happens, we don't do anything to change the trajectory. That is what the trend line that we are on to hit. So some of it is, for instance, as you know, there are certain fields that just become not productive anymore, right? They might
Correct.
start to go back to forest. There might be development put in on a couple different sides, and all of a sudden, the ability to get a tractor into that field that could be productive becomes more challenging.
or it could be our wetlands are closing in on them and not letting that happen as well.
All of those things.
Yeah,
Okay.
so not just like, sort of concrete going over a field, but
No,
yeah.
or even houses, but
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah,
Okay.
I find it interesting as well as Senator Heffernan. I'm not aware that there's going to be much development in Rutland County in terms of, I mean, the other side of the coin is we constantly hear the pressure from Act 250 that there isn't a
Right.
path forward that's sustainable and
Yeah.
timely and affordable to put housing up, for instance.
Yeah.
So I hear the other side a lot, and I'm puzzled as to where all that development's gonna be. Maybe it's all up in your neck of the woods.
Yeah. And that, the question was, as you said, it's just the projection over the last, how many years?
15? Well,
15.
no, this is,
Goes back
Yeah, so taking the trend,
trend line from,
right, from 90, I think, to either
Yeah.
2007 or 97. Let me see.
Yeah, and under
Yeah,
a runaway sprawl, and I drive a lot of Vermont, as all of us do here, and I just
Yeah.
don't see that happening. But I do see it being lost for other reasons.
Yeah, and that's right. So whether it's development pressure or going to the kind of farm viability question too, of it may not be viable to keep farming, and other land uses or opportunities arise where that land is used for something else.
or there might be, for instance, succession happening and there's not the next generation to take over the farm. There could be new people wanting to get into farming, but as Jake mentioned before, the cost per acre of
Mhm.
farmland is increasing. So it's kind of, I guess I would suggest to think that there's a lot of different factors. To me, as somebody that really wants to see Vermont's food system expand and have strong, profitable farms and food businesses, this is alarming to me, because what could we be doing to try to bend the curve and stem the tide, regardless of it, if it ends up being 30,000 acres or 41,200 acres, in my mind, that's still too much, right?
Yeah.
Hmm.
And I think the careful line here is not to suggest that needs to be in opposition to allowing it, making it easier for housing development, like that.
You're just giving us a statistic.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah. So no judgment being kind of made in what those numbers may or may not mean from a policy standpoint, but just that there is this, threat of
well,
further
that
loss.
little sentence in there is what kind of got me under a runaway sprawl scenario. And I just don't see, that. But I do
Right,
see
undercurrent.
your other, that people stop farming and land, and our issue is finding people that want to farm and be part of that system.
but I'm looking at the colors and I kind of blew it up so I could see it a little better.
Yeah.
Easement is green, and it looks like there's a substantial amount of acreage that will be lost due to easement. I'm guessing that some of that will be put into a conservation effort, maybe the land trust or something like that?
Yes, I don't think that's part of the loss. I think that's, there's some interpretation and more context probably that we could look at, because I think that's more of looking at that those lands that are in easements aren't subject to the same development pressures that.
Correct.
So the yellow is in this map is kind of the areas that would be most likely,
Okay.
to be converted,
Mhm.
because they're not, in say an easement.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah. And then, just kind of, looking at, what types of production, is this farmland in? Dairy is still the majority, but that number has declined over time. But again, some of that is just shifts of dairy, land that was, where the sales value of the land was in the dairy industry. It is now, a lot of that has just shifted to it's being used for cropping to provide, feed for dairy production. So there's still, even though the dairy acreage has decreased, there's been some kind of stabilization in just shifting land uses. And that's in part, but not in full. And then, I think what this also just shows is that while there has been growth in some other areas like crop farming, oilseed grains, vegetable acreage, those on a percent basis and total acreage are still very small in total numbers of acres. And so if you looked at this just kind of on a percentage basis, if you added up dairy, crop farming, hay, beef, animal production, and some of the other smaller livestock categories, 89% of farmland in Vermont is associated with raising and feeding livestock. So we are very much, a livestock production state. And
so we're hearing about the new markets of grain and stuff. Do you have any analysis of what your thought process would be on what we would expect to see on that, or is it still too early?
Yeah. So I think that, I think, so we have seen, some dairy producers that have shifted cropping into grains for like food consumption. There's great research that like Heather Darby and her outfit have done around that. I think a missing link has been, I mentioned earlier, like a grain center or centralized grain processing. So how do we store and process and sell the grain that's being produced is kind of the next phase. We know there's demand in also like the beverage industry for barley. So there's a lot of opportunities on the market side, but shifting production, and still there's a lot of crop loss that can happen, a lot of risk with that. So it's and also, beans is a growing area of demand, and so there have been some projects that shift some production into beans. But a lot of it is creating the scale of production to really supply the market.
And to have, quite frankly, an entrepreneur or a farmer that wants to go into the business of being a grain center, running a grain mill,
And markets.
all of that, and doing more markets, all that piece, right? All of those things are important components, and we're trying to get it on every angle to promote that up, but we ultimately need somebody to come forward to say, yeah, I want to do that.
Right.
Yeah, we did some work looking at, there's a grain center in Canada that provides grains to a large bakery and food processor. And it's really tightly run. They've really dialed in their systems, and but it's a large facility. It requires a lot of skill to run, and a lot of investment to build out the infrastructure.
We have one in Orleans County, but it's being imported in
Right.
for the beer industry, for the hops and what have you. I don't know exactly if it's all hops, but it's not it's not able to take in from the local market. It comes in on rail car. And I think another piece too is just the quality of what's grown. It has to meet certain specs and standards, and that's where farms kind of familiarizing themselves with how to grow to that standard, and frankly, take the risk to maybe transition their production into that crop. So another kind of thing to think about too is that farmland is not just cropland. That the majority of farmland in Vermont is actually in woodland acreage. So you can look at farm and break it down into kind of these different types of land uses. And actually woodland is the predominant land use that's happening on our farms. And that's, I think, just to say too, that farmers are managing, woodlands, woodlots, as well as cropland, as well as pasture land. So a lot of diversity of land use types that occur on a farm in Vermont.
So Jake, help me understand if you could on that last slide. We got more cows, but much less pasture. Where do they go? Where are those poor cows?
They stay in the barn. That's
Yeah,
right.
in the
Stay in the
barn,
barn.
Yeah, city cows to
Right.
country cows.
Yeah. So that's the intensification and.
No, that's a good way to put it.
That's the
really.
way I put it. That's the way I see it. They're on
That's a
concrete.
lot of
They're on
acres.
concrete all day. They're
Yeah.
where the lucky cows get to go out in the pasture.
Yeah. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah. And then if you look at that cropland, again, kind of reinforcing this idea of a lot of acreage is dedicated to animal production. So of the cropland that's being harvested, 91% of that is related to animal feed production. And so, really small percentages of cropland say that's actually in vegetable production, only about 1% of 3,600 acres.
Wow.
So that's, I think too, just, again, this like scale difference right now of industries, ag industries in Vermont and it raises questions of, how does a vegetable producer utilize 150 acres, because they're normally just cropping maybe 8 to 10, and that presents different management challenges. So there's these kind of issues of as land transitions, it presents challenges for different types of farms. And then just touching upon sort of how we're doing on water quality in the state. So there's been a lot of effort, work, investment here, and that has been shown to be working. So almost 500,000 acres of conservation practices since 2016 have been implemented. 207,000 kilograms of phosphorus reductions. If you look at the conservation practices implemented over time since 2016, it's continued to grow. The 2024 number is incomplete. It's not a full fiscal year, so that's why that's less. So farms are implementing these practices at higher rates. That has had a direct effect of reducing phosphorus. Of reducing phosphorus from agriculture. So there's real results happening there. And it's extremely cost effective for the state actually to invest in agriculture to do that. So this graphic is showing some of the averages and variances of a dollar invested, how many kilograms of estimated phosphorus will that reduce? Or for every dollar invested, what does it take to reduce a kilogram of phosphorus? And so on average, $104 invested in agriculture reduces a kilogram of phosphorus, whereas if you were to invest that in stormwater, you'd need to invest $4,800 to get a kilogram reduction. So agriculture is very efficient in reducing phosphorus, and is a good investment for the state in doing that. In terms of contributions to greenhouse gas emissions, agriculture is about 16% of the emissions profile in the state. And then, right now we're above the current 2025 target from the Global Warming Solutions Act. I know there's a lot of policy work happening around that, but that's the current figure. And so, agriculture does, have an impact here on emissions. But also it's utilized, it represents a lot of acreage. So kind of on a per acre basis, it's less than say developed land. And then not surprising, because a lot of livestock production is happening, a lot of those emissions are associated with methane from cows or manure management. There is emissions though from soils in general. And then another co-benefit here of the investments in water quality conservation practices is that those practices also sequester carbon. And so since fiscal year 21, there's been some estimates that the agency has done, and those practices are estimated to have sequestered in a maximum setting enough carbon to basically take almost 7,000 cars off the road in Vermont. So investing in water quality in agriculture is not only good from a phosphorus standpoint, but it's also good from a carbon standpoint. And then just last little piece here is a 0.1% increase in soil organic matter per year on corn and hay fields would basically achieve the emissions reduction targets that are defined in the Global Warming Solutions Act. And this is very much possible. This was work that UVM did. And just, I think, represents to the importance of our soils and providing a diversity of benefits to the state, or the benefit of our agricultural soils to achieving a number of goals that the state has. All right, and then lastly, just, I know you all heard a lot on the food access and security side, so I'm not going to go too far here, but just to kind of reiterate some of the elements of that. The food insecurity rate that's measured by USDA currently is projects 9.2% of Vermont households are food insecure, and that number is close to what it was in 2001. We've certainly seen rises in that through the Great Recession. And then interestingly, the rate declined during COVID, but a lot of that is because the state with federal relief dollars had increased the SNAP benefits per participant from $122 in 2019 to $247 on average in 2021. So I think the takeaway there is that money in people's pockets obviously makes a difference to whether or not they can provide food for themselves and their family. Meredith Niles and her research team looked at some of the factors there.
Percentage gone.
So food security, food access is not only a money issue, but that is the main driver. But there's other factors like transportation, time to cook, time to find food, accessing locations. So really, the main factors: money, transportation, and availability of really time. And those are some of the main factors of food access and food security in the state.
Yes.
So on lack of money,
Yeah.
how do they determine lack of money?
Thank you. Yeah, I have to look at how that question is phrased, but it's basically the not either having the sense that you can afford or not in reality being able to afford.
There's some people that just can't afford it, but then there's other people that just don't spend their money wisely.
Yeah.
And I say this because I have some employees that do this that are food insecure, but it's because of the choices they make. And not that it's right or wrong, but it's like, where do we get this number that it increases it so much that is it the, I just like to know where that number comes from, more secure than just when you came into the shelter to get food, I just didn't have any money.
Right.
And it's not our right to go, well, what you do with your paycheck this week? We can't ask that question, but
Yeah.
I've seen it.
Yeah.
And it's troubling to me to have, people that they just mismanage your funds.
Yeah.
And we're doing the right thing, making sure they have food, but it's, and this is probably not a question for you guys. I don't know who it's.
You mentioned Meredith Niles, right? And this is a UVM research study with actual data collection and, not just an anecdotal sort of thing.
Right.
Yeah.
And do you, I haven't looked at the study yet, but do you guys know how long that study took?
Well,
You don't.
Yeah, they've been researching a sample of, I think it's like over 900 people for a long time through the COVID period. This was a new study that was done in Vermont and Maine, so it represents some of the population of Maine in the analysis. But yeah, she would be, and that team would be the better ones to ask like the specific variables of the but yeah, I think there's a lot of you can unpack there of like personal finances and other issues, and I think her team probably would know some of the factors behind.
All right, great, thanks.
Yeah. And the other thing I want to just emphasize here is that, not to suggest again that the lack of money means that it's all needs to come from enhanced benefits. So this is tied to economic development of like wages and jobs and things like that. So it's it's a more complex, I think, question of like, where does that money come from, and how do we increase people's ability to have what they need to afford what they need. And then these next slides here just showing that food insecurity is experienced differently by different types of populations. So if you look at it by race or ethnicity, that is definitely a factor in determining who's experiencing higher rates. If you look at it by gender or sexuality, it's also a factor that determines higher rates. And then if you look at it too by disability status, you're more likely to be food insecure if you're in a household with or if you yourself have a disability. So there's different various factors that influence levels of food insecurity in the state of Vermont. All right. Thank you. I know that was kind of a lot of ground to cover, and I just appreciate
the SNAP data. This is all from federal data. This is the sources ACS.
Yeah, and it's broke. Yeah, the department. I think this is actually Department of Health has provided the analysis for Vermont.
Okay.
Yeah,
great.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Well, good. What's next?
Do you have
Do
any?
you have any more?
I think there was a question at some point, with some testimony you may have gotten from, somebody else, I'm not really sure, about the question around coordination amongst all the different organizations that are working the food system. And that is one of the main functions that the Sustainable Jobs Fund through our Vermont Farm to Plate program offers, is that prior to Farm to Plate coming into existence in 2009, a lot of folks in the legislature just didn't know, like, well, who's doing what with whom and in what way. And so forming this large network of organizations, which includes private sector folks, educational institutions, the nonprofit community, all the major government agencies and personnel, and capital providers, all together, we have created a way in which we can be more coordinated and focused, so that this plan, as Jake said, being written by so many people with subject matter expertise, it means that they then have ownership and belief that this is our collective plan forward, and are actively working to implement it based on their missions, what their businesses are doing, but it headed in the same direction. So we have, Jake mentioned that we calculated about 10% of local food sales. We've created a goal that by 2030, we get to 25% local food sales. So UVM Sodexo, a number of the meat processing facilities, a number of farms we work with, all the nonprofit organizations, we're all trying to move the needle in that direction, not only because it makes us more food secure from the standpoint of securing the food supply for our own eating, right, to feed more of ourselves with what we're able to produce, but it also is the economic benefit that comes along with that, and greater profitability, hopefully, for the farms and the food businesses that are actually producing it. So we're trying to, with this kind of data that we collect and the kind of presentations we make, it's also to help producers understand the marketplace better, right? Because so much consolidation has been happening across the food system, whether it's in large-scale production across the country, or processing, or distribution, or retailing. You have typically in those four parts of our food system, somewhere in this country, it's about between 4 and 5 mega corporations own 60 to 70% of all of the economic activity. Like, they own all the stores, or they own all the processing facilities. And so we feel that that actually makes us more vulnerable in the Northeast, because we're at the end of the supply chain of where a lot of that activity is happening. So our work is really aimed at how can we make ourselves more food secure within a 6-state region so that we're producing and consuming more of what it is that we eat on a daily basis. And the kind of economic multiplier effect that comes from that. But to do that, we have to open up markets. We have to help producers understand the rules of the marketplace. Because when things are more consolidated, the understanding of how do I get my product onto the shelves is not as readily known. So a lot of the work that we're doing with producers is helping them to learn more about what it takes to get your product onto grocery store shelves. Because we know that most people get their food from grocery stores. So if we want to increase local food sales, we have to get more local products into grocery stores. But to do that, we have to help producers learn how to do that. And we have to have the distribution and the warehouses and that kind of infrastructure that supports those producers to get those products into those stores. So we have to hit it from every single angle because it's not just this magic bullet of, well, if we just do this one thing, we're gonna get there.
Yeah, so thank you, Mr. Chair. That's a great point, Ellen. And I imagine, although I've never run a supermarket chain, that you're almost at cross purposes with the ability of the market to offer produce and products at the lowest possible price so that they continue to have customers come in and buy it. So I'm kind of curious what sort of negotiations might be taking place that we can get end caps that are strictly Vermont products. Unfortunately, for the most part, they're always going to be more expensive. I don't think there's any way around that because the margins, when you're up against the Midwest absolute huge chain that can move product pretty quickly and get it in the stores here. And so you're competing directly against our own people that, for whatever reason, have to have a better margin in order to continue being profitable themselves. So it must be a pretty interesting negotiation. And I'm thinking of, with all due respect to folks listening, Shaw's and Hannaford's and the ones that we all think of when people go shopping.
Yeah.
Right.
There are some that are a little bit more inclined, probably like Trader Joe's, to not be as worried about that price point. But they're not as big either.
Yeah.
Which is why strategically in 2014, we started this whole retail training and merchandising support work. The technical assistance we're providing is targeted to our independently owned grocery stores and food co-ops in the state. Because you think about it from a farmer's market perspective, right? You go there because you've gotten to know the farmer.
Exactly.
And you feel good about buying their produce or buying their potatoes or buying their meat. Same thing, if our independently owned grocery stores are owned by Vermonters and they're living in our communities, the opportunity to create those relationships, to be like, hey, how about you try to sell more from X, Y, and Z farms that are in your area? And they might say, well, I'm trying to, but I've got all these barriers to doing so. Then our retail sales consultant who's been in the trenches for 20 plus years doing this can help them think through strategically, well, how could I do that, right? Or they might say, I've got lots of produce, but I really would love some more grains. I'd love some more local bakery, or I'd love some more local meat. I don't know where to get that. Then the person that we have on contract can do that kind of matchmaking because she knows what products are on what trucks of what distributors.
Yeah.
Right, so it's that level of matchmaking, that switchboard operator kind of function that we've been playing through Vermont Farm to Plate all these years.
Yeah.
One of the interesting products, and I think this is Senator Major's favorite product, beer. I'm not sure that that's a fair statement, but you seem to mention it a couple of times. People are
Have you had Sip of Sunshine?
Yes,
it is.
that is my favorite, but people are willing to pay $3 or $4 a can. And they're just willing to do it. And it's sort of salesmanship.
Yeah.
And you're right. If you can get meat that's locally produced, processed, and produce, and have people feel like, and when I go to the farmer's market, I know it's going to be more than if I just went up the street.
Sure.
But it's okay because I'm helping the local farmer, and quite honestly, it's a better product.
Yeah.
But
Right.
the difference between the price sometimes moves people in certain ways. But the craft beer thing has been just an absolute mystery to me. but I do it. How am I justified paying, and I could do an Anheuser-Busch six-pack almost for half the price it costs to buy 4 of Lawson's, Super
Right.
Sunshine.
But what does your palate tell you?
Oh, it's better stuff, there's no doubt about it. I wouldn't be drinking it if it wasn't better, with all due respect.
Yeah,
So what we're trying to do here is honorable and good, but feeding the masses, feeding the large masses, it's just something that Vermont will not be able to do just because of our climate and that.
Correct.
So it's taking advantage of what you're saying, but it's just being realistic that
Absolutely.
we're not gonna, and sometimes you have people that are, we're gonna just, it's gonna happen. It's like, it just feasibly can't.
yeah, I mean, I'm glad you're saying that, because I think part of what we do also on the producer side of business coaching is like really understanding like the product you're making, who are your real customers? Who are your real customers going to be? And really then understanding like what are the stores that you should be selling to, is a big factor of whether or not that business is gonna survive or not. And I mean, I think the interesting thing on the retail side is that, you know, working with independent grocers is like getting them to understand that they can actually enhance margin by diversifying their product mix, that they may not be reaching all the customers that they could be with their current selection. So yeah, like you want that mix of, you know, value, kind of affordable items, but there's also, you know, there's unmet maybe demand that you're not taking advantage of, in sort of adding a local component. So and I think that larger retailers are also starting to kind of understand that. And, you know, they're also worried about the supply chain security. You know, they've experienced empty shelves, and the worst thing for a store is an empty shelf where no one can buy anything. And so there's a lot of, you know, shifts in the marketplace in that way that we're trying to take advantage of, and, you know, use that as a way to bring more of what we're producing to those stores, understanding that some of it might be a premium product because that's what we're good at making, and that's what's going to be good for the farm and the food producer too. Like that's how they're going to make their living. And it's a tough issue of matching that balance.
It's like when I first started with my family and that, it was whatever I could afford, I'd still want. I'd plan it to have the really local stuff, and we even had a small garden that we sold to other people for a while.
Yeah.
But it's knowing that, you know, if I had to feed Bristol, it just wasn't gonna happen.
No.
And it's staying in that lane of saying, we need to support these people as well as we can, and understand that, you know, when the big guys come in, they're taking care of the masses that we can't.
Absolutely, which is why us setting a goal of 25% is still the vast minority, right? It still means 75% coming from elsewhere. Now, if you look at, there's another report on your desk there called New England Feeding New England. There's a lot of greater opportunity if we think about our regional food shed across the 6 states, right? Between the seafood that comes from the southern New England parts, the potatoes from Maine, there's a lot of opportunity to grow more produce and also meat in other parts of New England as well as Vermont. So if we really think about it from a regional perspective, you got 15.3 million people across the 6 states of New England. How could we get all of New England to be 15, 20, 30%? That's a lot of billions of dollars of money that stays within our region, so that then, and from a food security standpoint, meaning like securing the food supply for our own purposes, you think about the droughts in the Midwest that happen on cycles, you think about the fires in California, you think about the trade tariffs potential in Mexico and Canada. Where is the food coming from? You know, the vast majority of food that enters the United States from outside our borders goes through the port of Los Angeles. We are so far from the port of Los Angeles, trucking routes, in terms of the trucking that it takes, for instance, to get that food here. So what can we be doing more of here that makes sense for us to do here? Understanding we're still gonna get our oranges from Florida, we're still gonna get our coffee from various places around the globe. We're still gonna get our cocoa beans for our chocolate. Like, none of that, we're not saying that's not what we're gonna still do. And there's gonna be an awful lot of products that are in our supermarkets that, yeah, they're never gonna come from here. And that's okay. It's just reality, right?
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah,
We
Yeah, thank
appreciate you
you.
coming in. Good information.
Yeah.
Good discussion.
yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely.
Thank
Appreciate it. Thank you.
Good.
Thank you.